So one of the things that you need to consider is homeschooling even legal in the countries that you're visiting? Because there are some countries where homeschooling is not allowed at all, and compulsory education is like required for the kids that live there.
This is Worldschooling Q&A. I'm Astrid, creator of The Wandering Daughter. As a traveling family, we've spent 4 years traveling full-time to over 18 countries and 6 continents. Wherever we go, we try to learn as much as we can about the countries and cultures we visit. While we didn't coin the term, we like to call this worldschooling, using the world as our classroom. Each week, my husband Clint and I will answer one question about worldschooling and share our experiences of traveling the world with our kids. Ready to get started? Great! Let's dive in.
Today's question is, what legal considerations should I be aware of for long-term worldschooling travel?
Oh boy, this is a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. And we want to start by saying we are not lawyers or accountants, so please do not consider this episode as legal advice or tax advice or even like immigration advice.
Okay, so the first one we can start with, I think, is not as worrying, I guess, from that standpoint. What you want to tackle the first one?
Oh, yeah. So if you're going to be world schooling, I'm assuming that you're going to be educating your kids while you're traveling. And usually if you're a world schooler, it involves homeschooling. So one of the things that you need to consider is homeschooling even legal in the countries that you're visiting? Because there are some countries where homeschooling is not allowed at all. And compulsory education is like required for, the kids that live there.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing because usually foreigners will get a pass on this.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on how long you stay or other contexts, that can change that. For example, we had friends who were homeschooling while they were in Spain, and it was totally fine. But once they started to try to pursue their residency or try to buy a home, for example, they were basically presented with, well, your kids have to be enrolled in school.
Yeah, because homeschooling is illegal for Spanish kids or residents in Spain.
Yeah. So yeah, just knowing what the homeschooling laws, I think, are important.
What else should we consider?
Yeah, I think visa durations and requirements are critical. And often this is where I think a lot of people get in trouble, durations especially. So
yeah, you don't want to overstay your visa. For sure.
Yeah. There are some places where you can get away with overstaying your visa by paying a nominal fee. Don't risk it.
That's not something we recommend.
Yeah. So I know there's some digital nomads out there that will say, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Even in Mexico, for example, don't risk it. It's not, in our opinion, it's not worth the risk. But knowing what those durations are, knowing, for example, Mexico used to just have a flat 120-day visa. It's just flat 6 months. That's 120 days?
Yeah. What's that? 180.
180 days. A flat 6-month visa for anyone entering the country from the US. That's no longer the case. They'll ask you how long you want to be there, and then they'll usually just give you that amount of time. So if you do want to stay there for 6 months or you want it open-ended, you have to somehow show that you are planning on staying there for 6 months. And there might be additional scrutiny around that. So just knowing what the visa durations are. The big one is the big one that catches people off guard, I think, is the Schengen Treaty in Europe for United States citizens and for other. It's not just United States citizens. It's for, I think, Canadians have to follow this as well. Basically, most of Western Europe, with the exception of a handful of countries, you have 90 days total to stay in Europe. Meaning, if you're in France for 30 days, that means you have 60 days to be anywhere else in Europe. If you're in France for 90 days, you have to leave Europe for at least 90 days before you can come back. So where this gets people in trouble is digital nomads specifically, is they will say they'll stay in France for 85 days and then they'll plan on leaving. Maybe their flight gets delayed. Maybe something happens. They have to stay a few extra days. And then they have to transfer through another city
Yeah.
that's also in the Schengen Treaty zone.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're now overstaying their visa.
Yeah.
So that's an important one to pay attention to. Beyond that, requirements too. Are you allowed to work? Are you not allowed to work? Is there ambiguity in that? We've talked about it in the previous episodes. So we don't need to dive into that too much. Knowing, like Indonesia, for example, and getting, there was a period of time they were no longer doing, in fact, maybe they're not doing it now, visa on arrivals. So making sure that you have to get your visa up front.
Yeah.
Is there any vaccination considerations? So just knowing the requirements there.
Yeah. And I think on the topic of working limitations too, you're right. We did talk about this in previous episodes, but if you are planning on working or having a business or something, making sure that you have the right visa to do that. And making sure that like your employer, if you've got an employer or something, that you are allowed to work remotely too.
Yeah. I think also one thing to know is a lot of countries, I'll use Mexico as an example, they technically actually have a limitation on the number of devices you can bring in per person.
Yeah.
So I think their limit is technically 2 laptops and like 2 phones or 1 phone or something like that. There's a limitation on devices that you can bring in per person. So there are examples of people getting caught with that, with
Keep
trying
that
to bring
in
in
mind.
multiple devices. And basically, a lot of times what will end up happening is they have to pay a commerce tax. And that can sometimes be pretty steep, like, some percentage of what the value of the equipment is.
Yeah.
So
What are some good places to find that kind of information if you're going to be traveling?
for me, it's always been finding it starting with trying to find it on digital nomad blogs.
Okay.
Digital nomad resources are great just because they've existed longer than world schooling resources. There's some great resources out there within the digital nomad community, whether it's Facebook groups or blogs, that will point you to some of the stuff. It is in the guidelines. So say Mexico's visa laws, for example, if you read through, I've actually read through the Mexican visa laws, and I've read through the UK visa laws. And both of them, they both explicitly have device limitations written.
Yeah. So definitely check the government websites because or like their consulate or whatever, the government's version of like the tourism or travel
Yeah.
sites.
Yeah.
Now, what about this one? What about LGBTQ considerations if you're part of a family that is LGBTQ?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know a few families that are LGBTQ, and sadly, there are some considerations they have to account for when they're traveling around the world. One of them is that in some regions of the world, that it is illegal, in some cases highly illegal, to be gay. And so traveling to certain regions of the world potentially puts them in danger.
Yep.
And so knowing what those places are and knowing how to avoid them, or knowing how, for example, Indonesia is an example of this, where as a whole, Indonesia, being gay is illegal.
Yeah.
And can carry a high punishment depending on where you're at. But for example, many LGBTQ families and couples will travel to Bali because Bali has more of a reputation of kind of turning a blind eye to that. And so that's a great example of, there may be flexibility within those regions, but I think knowing ahead of time what you may face may help you make an educated decision, I guess. And I think that's a great example of reaching out to other people.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Find families that have experience in the places that you want to visit and like reach out to them and ask them questions.
And that's where, like, I think also, and if you don't know anybody, or if you're having a hard time finding, like, talk to some experienced world schooling families. And chances are, like us, for example, we've met a few people, we're friends with a few LGBTQ families, so we can make introductions there to try to navigate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? Are there any maybe tax implications or any other?
Yeah, I think if you're going to be, I think this really depends on your country and if you're in the United States, like the state that you identify as your home state. There are certain things to keep in mind in terms of taxes, like if you're spending an extended amount of time outside of the US, like if you're an American citizen and you're spending a certain an extended amount of time outside of the US, you could be, I think there was something about like foreign resident or something. You could,
Yeah, it's a discount here in the US or
yeah, or like
yeah.
you could ask for an extension for your taxes because you're outside of the country. Again, we're not tax advisors, but just know that there are some tax considerations as well.
The great thing is digital nomad community, there's actually a lot of accountants that have experience with digital nomadism. So those they're actually kind of easy to find.
But what about if you're planning on driving?
Driving laws is hilarious. It makes sense. You need to know driving laws wherever you're at. You're in the US, you're a US citizen, you need to know driving laws. I think where it can get a little tricky is understanding the cultural driving laws or the cultural norms.
Yeah, that's a good point.
A great example of this for us was in Italy. When we were driving in Italy, the cultural norm there now is that there is little to none actual policing, physical policing of speed limits, but everything is camera based. And on top of that, it's just assumed that when you enter a town, the speed limit is a certain amount. When you exit a town, the speed limit is a certain amount. When you're on a motorway, the speed limit is a certain amount. And a lot of times there's no science to tell you what those speed limits are. This bit us because we did not know that initially. And we racked up some nice speeding tickets.
Yeah.
After the fact.
I think it ended up being over $200 tickets.
That you get afterwards when you're already left the country.
Yeah, they charge the rental company and then the rental company passes that on to us.
I think another one too, like in the UK especially and Italy, there are a lot of no driving areas or bus only areas or pedestrian only areas.
So keep aware of that as you're driving.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I mentioned a lot of these on my website. You can check out the article, things to consider for around the world travel. And I also I cover these topics as well in my ebook, Hey Kids, Let's Go Travel.
Cool. All right.
Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Worldschooling Q&A with Astrid and Clint. Be sure to check out the show notes for any links we mentioned in the episode and visit my website, thewanderingdaughter.com, to dive deeper into worldschooling and family travel.
If you like what you hear, please consider supporting The Wandering Daughter on Patreon. It really helps us out and keeps the show going. You'll also get exclusive perks like episode transcripts, additional resources, access to office hours with us, and more. You can find us on Spotify or the podcast app of your choice. If you're listening to this on Spotify, you can tap the bell icon to get notified when new episodes come out. And if you like this episode, please give us a 5-star review. It really helps new people find our show.
If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap the bell icon to get notified of new episodes. You can follow me on Instagram @WanderDaughter or follow The Wandering Daughter on Facebook. Links to these are also in the show notes. If you have any worldschooling questions you'd like us to answer for future episodes, feel free to throw them in the comments or send us a message at thewanderingdaughter.com/podcast. Until next time, happy travels!
Bye!